All right, everyone, we're going to get started here. I know we have a few people trickling in still, so I'm going to start back from the top here. And if I know some of you looking through the list of attendees, I've worked with several of you, and some of you are aware of what we do speaking with you. But my name's Matt Frederick, and I work in business development here at storEDGE on a number of our platforms. And today's webinar, as you know, is going to be on aggregators, not necessarily a four-letter word. We're going to discuss aggregators as a whole and kind of what they do in the self-storage industry. But first thing we're going to kind of cover here is just a brief agenda of what we're going to discuss today. The first is, what is an aggregator? Kind of go over the general history of aggregators. Show you a couple examples of self-storage aggregators I'm sure many of you are aware of or use or have used in the past. How aggregators work, and what are some of the benefits of using self-storage aggregators. So what is an aggregator? As you can see here, I just typed in a basic Google search and popped up with results, and I thought, what Google came up with described it perfectly. The first definition you'll see here is a website or program that collects related items of content and displays them or links to them. The second one also pertains to self-storage as well. You need to switch the words around a little bit, but an aggregator is a service who packages their service and sells it to consumers. In this case, the service being their SEO ranking and their ability to drive leads to self-storage operators. To briefly discuss the history of aggregators, as you'll notice here, one of the most commonly known aggregators and biggest aggregators are in the hotel and restaurant industry. I know many of you are aware of several of these brands that are posted on here. You've probably even used either all of them or a few of them from time to time. If I was to list all of them, it'd be several slides worth of aggregators in the hotel and travel industry. Really, the one thing to cover on here is the industry versus the consumer. In the hotel and restaurant industry, the aggregators were really great for consumers. The amount of people flying on airlines and the availability for people to book airlines or flights, really took off. From a pricing standpoint, it made pricing more competitive across the board. And from a selection standpoint, they had the ability to go across multiple sites to see a long list of flights from a long list of companies. So in the past, as many of you may remember or have dealt with yourselves, you had to go through a travel agent or you had to speak with the airlines directly, so it was really hard to shop or compare pricing. As many of you know as well, it wasn't necessarily good for the industry. It commoditized a lot of it because people begin to look at every flight as equal, and the same goes for self-storage. People begin to look at a 10 by 10 as a 10 by 10, regardless of who they're renting the 10 by 10 from or what other features a 10 by 10 may have. But one thing it does do is it does drive consumer behavior and demand. People tend to use these sites over and over. Many of you might use the same aggregator site every time you fly. You may use 2 or 3 of them, or you use a service like Kayak to compare all of them. The next thing we're going to kind of touch on is some of the self-storage aggregators. Again, many of you are familiar with these brands on this page. This is just a snapshot of some of them that are more commonly used or known about. But what self-storage aggregators are doing, I put in quotes there, as you'll see, leasing the space to self-storage operators. So through the aggregators' efforts online with engineering, development, content, the constant and long-term results of their SEO or search engine optimization work, they're leasing this space out to operators to be found on the search engines to drive you business. There's a couple different types of self-storage aggregators, or 2 different models, if you will, The first being a subscription-based model or monthly fee model. The second being a per reservation model. Many of you have probably used these or are using several of these brands on this site, and we'll kind of go into how each one of these works next here on this webinar. The first one to cover is the ones that were on the left-hand side, the subscription-based or monthly fee model. These can be extremely cost-effective. They usually charge a low monthly rate. It might be anywhere from $50 to $70 or $80 a month. So while the cost is nice, there is a much higher risk, because you do have that risk that if you do not receive a rental, that you're still being charged. But at the same token, with that higher risk, they can generate a much higher ROI than the other paper reservation models. For example, if you were to rent a 10 by 10 for numbers' sakes here for $100 a month, the average length of stay for 12 months, about $100 per month equals about $1,200 a year. So for that low $50, $60, $70 a month charge, you're making about essentially approximately $1,100 of profit off that one rental. The biggest part or biggest thing to make sure operators are doing, and a lot of the services provide it with their subscription-based or monthly fee, is to make sure that you're tracking your leads. It really is the most crucial part, whether you're using an aggregator or any other type of advertising online. Many of these services have recorded phone calls, the ability to show you every time someone clicks on a coupon or prints directions off on your aggregator's page that they provide you. So you can get exactly an idea of how people interact with your page or the type of leads you're getting. The second one to briefly touch on here as well is the pay-per reservation model. Some people prefer this and really like this because they're essentially paying for what reservations they have confirmed that are sent to them by the aggregator. They can be a little more expensive, but also has a much lower risk because, again, you're only paying for the rentals or reservations you receive. A lot of time with these services that are pay per reservation, the price can vary. So, for example, maybe a 5x5 might cost you $50 for the reservation. A 10x10 may cost you $100. Those aren't exact numbers, but just to kind of give you an idea. Usually, the larger the unit, or maybe climate controlled, or some other specific type of unit, the cost might be much higher. The other thing that a lot of these paper reservation models do is that they spend a huge amount of money in the Google AdWords or pay-per-click ads, not just Google, Bing, Yahoo as well, and some of the other search engines, but they're essentially taking the risk out of paying for these Google AdWords for a lot of operators, large and small. So instead of you paying per click for, maybe someone clicks on it 20 times and you never receive a rental, the aggregator's taking that risk because they're essentially trying to drive as much business to you as possible, and instead of you having to spend the money and being at risk, they are taking the risk. The other thing that they do as well in the pay-per-click ads is they also are more aware of how to manage them properly. Many self-storage operators do a great job of managing their own pay-per-click ads, but there are a lot of, especially smaller operators, that aren't aware of all the ins and outs of Google AdWords or pay-per-click that could be beneficial to their brand, to drive them traffic, so they don't always get the best marketing spend out of that pay-per-click. It might be more cost-effective for them to use the pay-per-reservation model. The next one we're going to briefly touch on here as well is the percentage of rent per month model. Generally speaking, these models ask you to pay a percentage of the rent anytime someone reserves or rents with your facility. On average, the percentage they ask you to pay for the length of the lease is 30% of the monthly fee. So in the case of the $100 10x10 rental we used for the other ones, it can be very expensive as well. $30 a month for the lifetime of the lease, it costs you about $360 for that year for that one rental, whereas the reservation model may have cost you $100 for that reservation, and the subscription model may have cost you a little less, around the $50, $60, $70 range. The next thing to touch on, I know there's a lot of smaller operators on here, especially 1, 2, 3 store brands. there are some very good benefits of aggregators for these smaller operators. The example I like to use is the struggle of the smaller operator versus the bigger market. And as you'll see in the example here, I used Dallas, Texas, but really you could use any metro or any large city market. As many of you know, as these markets are extremely competitive, you often have several storage facilities in the same general vicinity. You're also competing against many of the larger REITs or larger brands in that market, or management companies that have been working on their website and their SEO for a long period of time. So it's very hard for them to keep up it from a budget standpoint, resources standpoint, and a lot of time they haven't spent as much time doing some of these things, so they're already behind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to a Google search here that I have pulled up. And what I searched here is just one of the most basic self-storage related searches. I typed in self-storage followed by the city name and state. And as many of you know, this beige box here is the Google AdWords or the pay-per-click ads, along with the ones on the side. This is where aggregators, often spend money as well to drive you business, and they manage that on their own to give you as many rentals as possible. But going down to what are called the organic listings below the pay-per-click ads, you'll notice how competitive just a market like Dallas can be. Sparefoot, for instance, here is an aggregator. They've done very well from an SEO standpoint in this market. They're ranked very high. The next one down here is Public Storage. As you can see, they have 58 self-storage facilities just in Dallas, Dallas Metro. And so as you go down this list, you'll see more and more of these REITs and large operators. You really don't see any smaller brands on this first page. So you can see how, I hate to use the word impossible, but the uphill battle for a smaller operator is very steep as far as landing on a first page for a search in a major metro like this. Same thing goes with another search. I typed in Houston, another example. There's even more REITs only on this whole first page essentially. To jump back into the slide here, the other thing aggregators can do with smaller brands or even medium to large size brands is it can help them be found not only in their immediate markets but surrounding markets as well. Maybe you're one of the few markets in the area that has climate control, or maybe you have a specific type of wine storage, or maybe you have an extended amount of RV and boat parking that someone doesn't have in your general area. Aggregators help give you more exposure in other markets. So if you're in other suburb areas, when people are searching for your brand, for instance in Dallas, they may search self-storage Dallas, but maybe you're in Plano, you might be able to see that even though you're 10, 15 miles away, you find a brand that has a specific deal. Maybe you like the way the facility looks, it's clean and looks nice. Maybe they have certain amenities that might help your brand. It can help extend the range of your business. Some of the other benefits of using aggregators, again, as many as you know, it's an additional way to drive leads. There's a lot of people that use aggregators on a temporary basis just during busy season, or maybe during slow season when they're not receiving as much traffic. They want to generate some higher occupancies. And the good thing about that is that aggregators usually have no contract and no long-term commitment. So you're not locked into anything. Maybe you just need it for 2 months. Maybe you need it for 6 or a year. You really pick and choose how often you come and go from using the aggregators. So if you are around 80-85% and you want to get above that 90% range, you might use the aggregators for a couple months to help fill up your facility, and then you can get off it and do the same thing 5 months down the road if you drop down to 80% again. The other thing it does, and a lot of people use it for, is that it gives you an additional spot to be found on the search engines. As you know, as we went over that first search, it's very competitive on the first page, not only in big markets, but every market. And there's only so many spots on that first page. And so if your website is on the first page, that's great. I definitely commend you for that. It takes a lot of effort to get there, but having another piece of real estate, or what we like to kind of coin another ticket in the raffle to be found on the search engines, you're only helping your brand out by having more spots on that first page, because if you're not doing it, someone else is most likely taking advantage of that. In smaller markets or medium-sized markets as well, you usually tend not to have as many people on the aggregator sites. In Dallas or Houston or some of these other metros, on a lot of the aggregators, there's 50 to 100 or even more brands all listed on these pages. But in smaller markets, you might find only a small handful, or you might be the only one. So essentially, all the traffic for that extra space on the that extra spot on the first page of search, all that traffic is essentially being funneled into your store. So you might have your website coming up first or second or third, but there might be an aggregator listed fourth or fifth. That just gives you another way to be found, to where if someone does pass by your website, they're able to find it again. The other thing that goes along the terms from a search engine optimization standpoint is aggregators can help brands come up for a wide variety of searches. A lot of people might use, a local guy or a local SEO company, or even a small design firm that doesn't put as much time and effort because they don't have the resources to research that there are not only 5 basic terms everyone looks at, but there's hundreds of terms. Even the most awkward long searches as storage units near I-35 and the quick shop on Main Street. We see long range of searches that people search. We want to help you aggregators want to help come up for those searches as well. So your website might be nowhere to be found on these searches, but the aggregators are. So it's allowing you to come up for not only those main searches that most people optimize for, but that wide range. Also, that being said, there's less competition for those off-the-wall searches, and if you're on the aggregator site, that might be the only way for you to be found on that search. So it can only benefit you from that standpoint. This is kind of a rare example, and I added this slide in actually later on in the presentation after I saw there was a large number of smaller operators that had attended this webinar. And there are some smaller operators, especially in small markets, that use aggregators for their website. And I'll show you the example of that here shortly. But the reason for that is, if you really want a nice website with a lot of the features the aggregators have, it can be very expensive. It could cost thousands of dollars. We always encourage you to have your own website because it's very important to drive a majority of leads from your website and allow aggregators to fill the void. But there are a number of people in the industry that use aggregators for their actual website. A couple reasons for this that I have listed here is the low cost. Again, if you're paying a low monthly fee, or you're paying a low cost per rental, or even a percentage, you can get a nice looking site for a very low cost. The other side of that thing as well is many of them have a clean design. They also have a conversion design that they've put a lot of research, and they do a lot of ongoing research as well as far as what layout is the best for you to drive leads to your store that the average person building a website might not be aware of because they don't deal in our industry. The other thing a lot of them can do to help you out as well is they can do maps management. Many people manage their Google, Yahoo, Bing Maps themselves and can do very well at it. The benefit of having an aggregator handle it for you is they can use the knowledge they've received from managing maps in almost every market in the United States to help your brand. So if different terms are working in other markets, they can plug those in, or if there's a new practice that Google comes out with that they prefer on their maps, aggregators probably going to be more aware of it than you as an operator who have your hands full with just running your business. This just takes something else off your plate. Many of the aggregators make this an optional service, or some of them charge an extra fee to do that, but it's just another way to drive traffic to your store through an aggregator. Kind of touch base on a few more of these. The mobile site, a lot of them have a mobile version of your site. Instead of having to pay someone to make a mobile website, your aggregator page already has one. Jumping around here. Call tracking. Many of them include call tracking. And then you get the SEO efforts that are already proven with an aggregator showing up very high. Instead of building a site and not knowing if it'll ever show up, you know that the aggregator is already there. And so down the road, maybe you want to build your website, but for the time being, you're going to show up on the first page, especially if it's short notice. Maybe you acquire the facility in January and you want to make sure you're on the first page in March when busy season starts to pick up. The last thing on here site management software integration. If you're using some of the larger site management softwares like SiteLink Web, CenterShift, Web Self-Storage, many of them integrate with your self-storage, your aggregator self-storage website, to where you can get a lot of advanced features such as pulling pricing and availability, using push rates, etc., that you might not have with your normal website. That being said, I want to jump into one quick example for you smaller operators on the site to give you an example of a brand I've personally worked with that uses storage aggregator as its website. Scrolling down here, you can see again, Sparefoot's done very well in this Toledo area. There's a larger brand listed at the top, another larger brand listed in the maps. But if you go below here, this Bayshore Self-Storage, he's pointing at his storage front page. So through the aggregator's efforts, he's coming up high on the search. Again, below, you find Storage Front again here, where he's coming up high as well. So for that low monthly fee he's coming up twice on that first page. And now this doesn't happen in every single market. It's not fair to say that, and many of you know that. But for this particular brand, he thinks that having Storage Front as his website has been beneficial to him. If he was to call me and ask me if he should build a website, I would definitely tell him to. Again, that goes back to you should always be driving majority leads from your website, and aggregators should be used mainly to fill the void. But in certain situations like this, it made sense for him to have this as his website. Jumping back into the slides here, the next thing we're going to discuss kind of is the conclusion. I know this webinar was kind of short and sweet, but many of you, some of this was repetitive, but I just wanted to give everyone an idea that aggregators can benefit your brand in a variety of ways. Businesses large and small use it to compete for leads online. If you're spending any type of advertising dollars, whether it's through an aggregator, your website, a billboard, a newspaper ad, we always encourage you to slap that tracking number on there. I know just from personal experience, we've saved a lot of people money. I'm sure other companies that you have used for tracking can save you an extensive amount of money. When you actually see where that money's going, you can get an idea of how many tracked leads you're using each month and what type of ROI they're generating. So aggregators, they can be good for operators, but yes, from a industry standpoint, it is making it harder for other operators to end up on the first page because the aggregators are spending a lot of time and effort to be there. But also, in that same token, as we went over on this, it can help the smaller brands. Going to jump in any Q&A here. If you have any questions or information that you'd like us to discuss again or go over, feel free to chat us your questions. And we're kind of limited on time, so we'll get to as many as we can. But we always encourage you to call us. The number's listed there. Numbers listed on the Storage Ahead site as well. Feel free to email us at any time with any questions, and we'll make sure we get them all answered. That being said, I appreciate everyone's time. And at this point, if you have any questions, let us know. We'll answer a couple of them here on the webinar. The first question we have is how popular is the percentage of rental fee model today, and what trend do you see with that model? I know some of the services that use that, it's picked up in the last year or so. I think it's relatively new to the industry, and what we feel is, yes, it can be more expensive, but if it's driving you an ROI, then we encourage you to use that, whether it's the percentage or reservation or subscription. If they're driving that ROI, we encourage you to use that. The trend we kind of see with this model is that it's really picked up. A lot of times we said 30% is the general amount of time, the general percentage people pay per month for the lifetime of the lease. It's really up to each individual brand what they feel is best for that particular facility. The next question we're seeing here is, what storage management software do you like? Really, there's a lot of great ones out there. I'd say the more commonly ones we hear is SiteLink, Web, CenterShift. The Web Self-Storage is very popular. Then you hear other ones that are a little smaller, not as many customers that do very well as well. The Cirasofts, the storage commanders. We really don't prefer either one. SiteLink Web and CenterShift are definitely probably the most robust, but that being said, they can also be the most from an investment standpoint for a self-storage operator. I think we got one more question coming in. Give me one sec. Someone's typing. The next question is, do you integrate with self-storage software providers? Yes, there's several services that do integrate with some of the site management software providers. Most of those being SiteLink and CenterShift, and some of them have some integration with web self-storage. Obviously, eMove and web self-storage are roughly the same thing through U-Haul that are integrated. Next question here. It looks like that person stopped typing. So if you have any more questions, though, I know some people don't like to ask them online, feel free to contact us again. That being said, we really appreciate everyone's time. I know you guys are busy, especially this time of year. So again, I appreciate your time. That being said, if you guys are going out to the National Self-Storage Association show in Vegas here in a week or two, I encourage you to stop by as well. It's always nice to put a face to a name in the self-storage industry, since we only get to see operators so often. But that being said, I appreciate your time again, and hopefully business is good. And if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you.